Can getting the right intelligence in a war save the world from mass catastrophe? We have witnessed many examples of the situation in the history of world wars, especially after the Second World War. Countries established intelligence agencies instead of operational clashes. They preferred intelligence wars to get accurate information. For this, broad powers were given to intelligence areas. The CIA in the USA and the KGB in Russia are among the best examples of this. Confidentiality and being undetected are the most important elements in intelligence. However, we see that Russia's latest moves are helpless and easily detectable. The largest network in the field of intelligence is considered to be in the US military. For this, Russia has increased its work in the field of intelligence against the US. Russian leader Vladimir Putin, a former KGB agent, is also making desperate moves. It is known that Russia and the USA have great military and economic interests in the world's seas. Recently, China has joined this fleet. The US, Russian, and Chinese navies must have strong intelligence to outmaneuver each other. Russia, therefore, has, especially nowadays, turned towards the Atlantic, Arctic, and Baltic sides. The spying activities of the Russian Navy seem to increase in these regions. Intelligence and espionage are valuable when you go undetected. However, we see that Russia has difficulties in achieving this and makes desperate attempts. Several Russian spy ships have been spotted off the coast of Hawaii, Washington, and Alaska by the US Navy's Coast Guard in recent months. In January, a Russian spy ship was spotted and intercepted off the coast of Hawaii. In February, the Russian Admiral Gorshkov hypersonic missile carrier approached Washington shores. Also in February, Chinese and Russian navies were detected near Alaska. There has also been an increase in the activity of Russian spy ships in the North Sea recently. In particular, the detection of a Russian spy ship near a US Navy nuclear submarine was the last example of Putin's desperation. Scandinavian public broadcasters have revealed that Russia has a spy program in the North Sea that plans to sabotage energy infrastructures in Northern Europe and US submarine activities in the North Sea. The Russian military began using transport trawlers and the like, ostensibly resembling civilian ships, to gather information on civil infrastructure, wind farms, and other offshore facilities. Since the beginning of the war, Russia has been using the spy app. It is even known that 27 Russian spy boats have been seen in the North Sea in the last 5 years. According to research on the subject, more than 10 Russian spy trawlers have been seen in the Arctic Ocean since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. This is where the critical situation begins. The first noteworthy detail is that the Russians have increased their use of spy trawlers since the beginning of the war. The second remarkable detail, which is much more important, the Russians use these spy trawlers to gather intelligence about the presence of US submarines. In fact, this situation is at a level that will create an international crisis. But the Russian efforts remain a completely helpless effort in the face of the power of the US Navy and intelligence service. On the other hand, it turned out that the Russian spy trawlers, which threatened the US submarines and other Navy forces, also disturbed the countries in Europe over time. A Russian ship, which was recently detected in Belgian territorial waters, was also seen in Dutch territorial waters. According to North Sea Minister Vincent van Quickenborne, this Russian ship sailed in Belgian and Dutch waters with the automatic identification system turned off. Van Quickenborne mapped the sensitive infrastructure of this Russian ship. As a result, Quickenborne reports that this undoubtedly has to do with the wider context of the war in Ukraine. After the Russian ship was identified as a result of Quickenborne's work, an investigation began on the subject. From the 1st of January, the new maritime safety law came into effect, providing video surveillance at sea, which should in particular facilitate the detection of ships. In fact, since the enactment of this law, the espionage activities of the Russians have come to the fore. But Russia denies any involvement in intelligence gathering activities in the North Sea. But studies reveal that the Russians have been doing these espionage activities for a long time. Not only Belgium, but also countries such as Norway, Sweden, and Finland are among those claiming that the Russians are using spying programs, especially when the relations between the USA, China, Russia, and Ukraine are in such a cold and critical situation. The fact that the Russians carry out espionage activities in the North Sea is an indication of Moscow's few options to get out of the Ukraine war. That's why the Russians are mostly focused on the Navy. The reflection of the tension in the Indo-Pacific to the North Sea these days indicates that the global effects of the Ukraine war are spreading to much wider areas. The main source of this is Russia's espionage actions. Of course, it is thought that other Navy elements of the Russians are behind the scenes of this situation. In other words, it is estimated that the Russian Navy forces are constantly on duty to protect these trawlers, spy boats, and to facilitate their activities. In fact, it's not surprising that both Russia and China conduct such activities in the North Sea. Yes, China, which supports Russia in this war, also carries out many activities in terms of Navy, since it claims a right in the North Sea. However, the espionage action that the Russians are currently carrying out in the North Sea cannot go beyond being at a level that draws all the attention in this direction. So what is the main reason why Russia and China are so worried about espionage and naval activities in the North Sea? In fact, this situation has increased considerably since the USA's New Atlantic project began. In other words, Russia was disturbed by this extensive program of the United States to provide security in the North Sea and in response, began using trawlers and ships to spy. So was the US's New Atlantic project effective enough to worry the Russians? We can figure out the answer to this question very clearly by seeing the increasing Russian naval forces in the North Sea. Admiral Robert Burke, who was assigned to the European Command of the U.S. Naval Forces Command, reported that after the New Atlantic strategy, the Russian Navy forces were advancing towards the Atlantic Sea. Russia's concern was that the United States would complete one of the Ukrainian military's greatest shortcomings, its navy in the war in Ukraine. Therefore, the Russians have become accustomed to such activities in the North Sea constantly. So what is the purpose of Russia's increasing espionage and other naval activities in critical sea areas such as the Indo-Pacific, especially the North Sea? By taking a risk in front of the eyes of the whole world. In fact, this aim of the Russians is much more global. So the Russians may be trying to gain an advantage over China by gathering intelligence about US Navy power in the North Sea. Because considering that the tension between the USA, Russia, and China has escalated much more due to the war in Ukraine these days, especially in the naval areas, this option would make quite a lot of sense. As a result, we see how important intelligence and counterintelligence is. Russia's efforts are thwarted by the intelligence of the United States and its allies. As Russia's desperate efforts increase, so does the potential for error. The recent increase in Russian spy ships has triggered much tighter security measures by NATO and the USA. It was a situation that Putin did not want. However, with the increase of global security measures, Putin becomes even more desperate. In a critical war, power is necessary, but strategy and wisdom are more important. The same is necessary for allies. Ukraine has a single ally with both military and geostrategic power. Why did Ukrainian leader Zelensky challenge Russian President Vladimir Putin in Turkish? Turkey has moves to turn the tide of this war in favor of Kiev. Turkey's diplomatic strategy has saved millions of lives. You can support us by subscribing. Let's explore the realities behind the scenes on this issue and how Ukraine brought the war to this point. As a NATO member and Russia's only remaining link to the West, Turkey has used its unique strength to both arm Ukraine and host several peace tours. Also taking advantage of its geostrategic position, Turkey gained itself the role of mediator in order to reconcile both sides in the war between Russia and Ukraine and made critical moves to appease Russia's aggressive policies among NATO countries. Turkey remains the friendliest to Moscow, but is the only NATO country to supply Ukraine with weapons without the condition of not using them against targets inside Russia. Ukraine managed to effectively use the Turkish-made Bayraktar TB UAVs in its war against Russia, and the group of Ukrainian soldiers even wrote a song for Turkish-made Bayraktarjant in a video they shared on social media. In addition to the intense efforts to mediate between Ukraine and Russia, the Turkish government has so far delivered some 35 Bayraktar 2 terabits UAVs, 24 mini Bayraktar reconnaissance UAVs, LG-230 guided multiple rocket launchers, electronic warfare equipment, 200 BMC-KRP, MRIP mortars and ammunition. They also sent a number of other aid packages to the Ukrainian army. In addition, Turkey joined the tank coalition formed by Poland. The aim of the coalition is to provide Ukraine with powerful main battle tanks. Turkey's unexpected participation in the coalition worries Moscow because Turkey is one of the countries with the most Leopard 2 tanks among NATO countries. Turkey is one of the largest NATO countries with Leopard 204 tanks in its arsenal. As of 2019, the Turkish Armed Forces has 316 Leopard 204 tanks. However, there is no clear information about how many tanks Turkey will supply to Ukraine, considering that on average, 25% of the tanks in the inventory of NATO countries will be sent to Ukraine. We can assume that Turkey can send between 60 and 89 tanks to Ukraine. This is a serious number. In addition, Turkish armored vehicles on the Bakhmut front were of great help in pushing back the Russians on the critical front line. Many of the 200 BMC-KRP armored vehicles were spotted en route to the Bakhmut front. The UAV, designed in Turkey, has become one of the most well-known UAVs in the world due to its use in the Ukraine war. Experts define Bayraktar TB2 drones as a weapon that is relatively cheap, manufactured with ready-made parts, and has deadly power. It was seen and recorded on videos that missiles, laser-guided rockets, and smart bombs carried by Bayraktar 2 terabits destroyed Russian armored vehicles, artillery, and supply lines many times during the war. Aaron Stein, a senior researcher at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, stated that 2 terabits viral videos are a perfect example of modern warfare in the age of TikTok. On the other hand, the plan to build an assembly line for drones in Ukraine was ready even before the war. Also, using these UAVs may have saved the lives of Ukrainian pilots who would otherwise have to carry out missions. Researchers noted that 2 terabits Bayraktar drones are the savior when Ukraine's position is most unstable. Samuel Bendit, a senior researcher at the Center for Naval Analysis Russian Studies, said in a statement he shared at the beginning of the war that the videos of Russian casualties, thanks to Bayraktar 2 terabits drones, are a great morale booster for Ukraine. The intensity of Turkey's support for Ukraine, thanks to 2 terabits drones, should not surprise those who follow the country's foreign policy decisions in recent years. Alongside these supports, Turkey's intervention in the war in Ukraine was the only thing preventing Russia from gaining a firm military foothold on NATO's southern border. In fact, this situation carried great risks for Turkish foreign policy, which directly contradicted Russia's interests. Turkey was already faced with both internal and external threats from actors that received support from Russia or that could escalate its support. Ukraine, on the other hand, has chosen to keep publications about these deliveries to a minimum, rather than announce the extent of all this military support by Turkey. Most deliveries from Turkey were revealed only after they were detected in Ukraine or reported by Ukrainian sources. Most weapons sent from Turkey to the Ukrainian army were donated, while the rest were sold at huge discounts. On the other hand, Turkey's help in the plight of Ukraine has not been entirely a matter of government. Bytech gained international fame with the decision to donate 5 Bayraktar TB UAVs to Ukraine after crowdfunding organized. Nations from Lithuania, Ukraine, and Poland achieved their funding goals. The Turkish private defense company also used the collected $32 million for humanitarian defense and reconstruction projects in Ukraine. Interestingly, these donations seemed like only half of being a brave and generous ally. Ukrainian government sources reported that Ukraine received about 15 more Bayraktar TB2 from Baykov for free, and 15 more were sold at a lower price. It was announced that this price covers only because production costs. Beka also donated 24 mini Bayraktar reconnaissance UAVs to the Ukrainian armed forces. Two LG-230 guided missiles are believed to have a range of over 75 kilometers against targets such as combat vehicles capable of hitting up to 4 targets, but with a durability of more than 24 hours and the long range of the EO and IR sensor. The 230mm tire LG-230, which can detect much more in combined operations with the 2 terabytes, can accurately destroy the weapons identified by Bayraktar 2 terabits in rapid succession up to a range of 70 kilometers. On the other hand, Turkey has many more military assets that will fit perfectly with the Ukrainian armed forces. Turkey exports almost every weapon system imaginable, in addition to UCAVs and guided missiles. These exported weapons include 122mm D, 122 and 300mm TRV, 300 MIRLs, as well as air defense systems such as Hisar A+ with 15km range, Hisar with 25km range, and 35mm Korkut. Also, the Turkish army has such a god of war as a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun SPOG. This weapon is one of the most ideal defense mechanisms to counter the threat posed by both independently circulating munitions. In this regard, Turkey is seen as a serious source of support for the Ukrainian army. NATO continues to search its member states constantly to obtain weapons from the Soviet era. However, the gradual depletion of these resources may first lead to the purchase of more advanced weapons from Turkey on behalf of Ukraine. This situation does not pose any problem for both countries and NATO agreements. It is estimated that providing advanced armament to Ukraine is among Turkey's near-future plans, even if it could be used to attack targets inside Russia. In addition to the predictions that Turkey will become the most important supporter of the Kiev government in the coming period of the war, the serious military power of Baykartek during the Ukrainian war came to the fore by Kartak's Ungarer guided MANPADS, which has made Turkey a serious military pioneer throughout the defense industry, is of great importance in the fight against the threat posed by Iranian-made munitions by being integrated into Bayraktar B2. As a result, the fact that the country which has a super military power like Turkey is an ally of the Ukrainian army will strengthen the Kiev administration's hand in possible peace talks. In addition, if the predictions about war ammunition for Ukraine come true, that is, if Turkey continues to help the Ukrainian army in the following time, there is no obstacle for Ukraine not to win this war because the striking military support of the West, the USA and Turkey is seen as a beacon to pull Ukraine out of its darkness. There is a lot of news from the south. Here, Ukrainians have been hitting the Russian main logistical centers already for 2 days and have reportedly destroyed at least 7 bases. Russian analysts started to warn that the increased frequency of HIMARS strikes indicates that the counteroffensive might start very soon. And it seems like the Russian Ministry of Defense understands it as well because they just fired the commander of all Russian forces in southern Ukraine. Last time I told you that Ukrainians broke the long period of low activity in the region with a series of mechanized assaults, artillery and aviation strikes. I also told you that this was just the preparation for the counter-offensive operation because the current goal of Ukrainian troops is to get rid of the gray zones and get as close to the main Russian fortifications as possible. The freshest report suggests that the gray zone areas around Orikhiv have been reduced significantly. If previously Bilohirya was not permanently occupied by any party then, now it is clear that Ukrainians have established total control over this village and are slowly pushing further. the intensity of fights in front of Novodane has also increased. Here, Ukrainian 128th Assault Brigade has consistently been using up to 2 platoons for reconnaissance in first operations in the direction of Rabatini. Russian sources reported that Ukrainians are attacking from multiple directions at once and sometimes multiple times per day to catch the Russians off guard. The area of operations seems to be slowly expanding because Ukrainians also started assaulting Russian strongpoints between Robotan and Bilohirya. The openness of the area significantly complicates the situation, which is why not all attacks go according to the plan. Sometimes the Russians manage to stop a Ukrainian assault unit by spotting it with a drone and timely coordinating with the artillery. The latest update suggests that Ukrainians started to use smoke screens extensively in order to mask the movement and location of troops and prevent precise correction of artillery fire. Ukrainians also started assaulting Russian positions near Mirny. Previously, it was reported that Ukrainians only engaged their assault helicopters for conducting airstrikes to soften up Russian defenses. So the assaults here are not surprising. The increase in scope of the operations has already brought some results and revealed the weakest aspect of the Russian primary defense line. Despite the fact that Russians hold extensive trench networks, they are too sparsely located to protect one another, which is why they can easily be surrounded and collapsed during more comprehensive actions. However, storming of trenches may not be needed if an intense enough artillery preparation is conducted. Ukrainian artillery is already working on the revealed main Russian strongpoints in the region. Ukrainian artillery has also recently conducted a series of precision strikes. Yesterday, Mariupol Mayoral Advisor reported that Ukrainian HIMARS crews received an extensive PARA mission and targeted Russian bases in Melitopol, Tokmak, Volnovakha, Novotroitska and Donetsk. In Melitopol, Ukrainians destroyed a dormitory quota in Russian military and Ministry of Internal Affairs personnel, while in other places, Ukrainians targeted ammunition depots and warehouses with equipment. Today, the strikes continued and the Ukrainians also hit objects in Fedorivka and Berdyansk. Berdyansk is one of the main Russian logistical hubs with a lot of ammunition and equipment. Interestingly, Russian sources previously highlighted that if Ukrainians increase the frequency of HIMARS use in the Zaporizhia region, then the counter-offensive operation is imminent, and the closer the strikes are to the zero line, the closer is the offensive. Even though so far Ukrainians are mainly targeting the deeper area, Russian forces have already started making massive changes in the structure of the command. Several days ago, rumors started spreading that the Russian Ministry of Defense fired the commander of the Russian forces in the south, Rustam Muradov. Muradov took command on the 6th of October and has overseen a series of disastrous offensive operations, including the high casualties suffered in the assault against Pavlovka in October, November and the prolonged and failed effort to take Volodya. At first, Russian military bloggers were positive about the news in hopes that the Russian command is taking the threat seriously and trying to promote competent leaders. However, today it was announced that Muradov just went on vacation, so they temporarily assigned Andrei Kuzmenko. Many Russian military analysts are not happy with the change and have started to speculate that they just made him responsible in case they lose Zaporizhia and need to have someone to blame. Overall, Ukrainian forces are slowly establishing total control over the gray zones, getting closer to Russian positions and conducting reconnaissance in first operations to reveal the weaknesses in the Russian defense. In the meantime, Russian forces seem to have worsened their own command structure by assigning an involved general instead of getting rid of the inept leaders and promoting the commanders of units that are actually on the ground.